Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Just for some updates to start with, so the webinar will be recorded and a copy will be sent to everybody afterwards for you to either re-review or share with colleagues. When the meeting starts, your camera and your microphone will be switched off and muted. So if you do have any questions, please use the chat function. And at the end of today's presentation, we will go through any questions that you may have. So my name is Lisa Howkins. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director here at NFU Energy. I'm joined today by Ed Kimberley and Josh Robinson, who'll be running through an update of the energy market, what's happened in terms of both pricing and legislative changes, and as part of our webinar to update you on everything that is happening within the market right now. We're also delighted to share that we've got Lee Abbey on board from the policy team within NFU. So if there are any questions that you have, again, please use the Q&A function and we will ensure that we can answer those for you. So for those that are new to NFU Energy, so we are an organisation that's been around now for almost 30 years, and about 8 years ago we were purchased outright by the NFU as part of their commercial strategy. We look after all energy solutions and services on behalf of about 22,000 members. The organisation is split into two, so 50% of our business is our energy contracts and utilities team, who support all utility contracts from water, gas and electric. And the other side of our business is our professional service arm, which looks after anything from energy audits, feasibility studies, decarbonisation projects, compliance, and various different solutions. So with the energy market is an ever-changing landscape. So today, Josh and Ed will take some time to present what's happened, how it's affected organisations, how it may affect organisations or yourselves in the future, and what to expect moving forward. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Josh, who will start today's presentation. Josh, over to you.
Afternoon all, and firstly welcome to the webinar. So I'm going to start off with just talking a little bit about how the energy prices are made up in the UK. So as you can see from that slide there, they are broken into three separate sections. You would have your commodity charges. Commodity charges are normally things that you'll see on the news every day, primarily being driven by situations like Iran currently, situations like Russia, Ukraine a few years ago. You will then have your renewables and your delivery makeup as well. Combined together, they amount to just under 65%, but these will be a combination of government levies implemented close to home back on UK shores, and also then delivery charges, the prices of getting energy around the grid, getting energy from the pylons to your homes or to your businesses, to make it as easy as possible to understand. Your renewables section, as you can see there, is split to a number of different areas. We will cover that in a little bit more detail on the next slide. And your delivery sections are the ones that are largely being spoken about in the markets at the moment. Chinuos is a massive one currently, of course. We are having new ones coming in, balancing charges. There's a lot of money going into the infrastructure to try and drive change going forward to help us all in the longer term get more clean energy, have energy more readily available, so we're not committed to acts around the world impacting our energy prices at home. If you do just want to move on to the next slide for me, please. So looking at what goes into your energy bill, fortunately for people, this is a lot bigger than what you would normally see on your energy bills, but you can see there your energy bills are made up of up to 16 non-commodity charges. There'll be some that you've probably heard about quite a bit, Chinuos being one of them. You will also see other areas, your non-commodity charges. You'll see the wholesale energy cost built in there as well. And then you'll also see some that you've probably never heard of before. So if we looked right at the bottom and looked at the AAHEDC, these are only going to cover specific areas in the near to long future. Somewhere in the middle, you'll have things like your nuclear RAB, makes up currently about 1.5% of your bill. It's really, really important to understand with that one, for example, that that is going to constantly change over the years ahead. Um, Combined together, this is what ultimately you're paying your energy bills for. Some of the biggest charges on that bill, if you looked at DUOS as an example, your second one down, that is local distribution network charges. So the way to explain that really is the pylons after you've come off the motorway, the slightly smaller ones as you get close to home, those will be the ones that you're really paying for, and that's distributing area in your local, distributing energy in your local area, sorry. If we went sort of halfway down, you would obviously see one there, supplier margins and profits. We completely understand the suppliers do make money. An interesting one when we look at this with people is they always have the feeling that the suppliers are making an absolute fortune out of the energy costs. And you'll see there it's around about between 3 and 4% depending on the supplier. It does vary from supplier to supplier. So this is something that we're bringing in more and more. We're trying to actually get people to really understand what makes up their bills, and most importantly, as we'll come on to later in the webinar, what we can do about it, or is there any ways that we can circumnavigate some of those charges as well. So if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so as we spoke about commodity charges at the beginning, the big one that you'll probably be seeing on the news or the newspapers every single day is the Iran war. It's a fragile ceasefire at the moment. It has continued to hold out. You would have maybe seen this morning that there were some strikes. The US announced those as defensive strikes, but it's quite likely that you'll see that they will have an impact on energy prices maybe later on this week, if not already. There is continued market volatility. We have seen this since sort of mid-February. That price will be quite high one day, then it will drop down the next day, and then it will be high for a week. Then it may sort of stabilize out. This is something that we're very used to seeing. But again, just think back, that makes up about 35% of your bill. So some days you will see the cost of energy might go up half a penny. Other days it might only go up 0.1 of a penny, but it does fluctuate quite a bit. What we've done since the beginning of the conflict is we have looked at how we can mirror the oil price and what's happening on the price of oil. And we've seen that hovering between sort of 95 and $115 a barrel, but we are also looking at that, how closely aligned that is to the energy market as well. The Strait of Hormuz officially remains closed. In all but name, you are seeing that America are on one end, not letting tankers in. Iran are charging a toll for other tankers to go through. There is minimal work, minimal tankers going through there. There is expectations with the ceasefire, if there is a permanent agreement, that would be reopened, and that's the sort of the benefit to everybody, really. That's what we were all looking for. Talks around an end to the war do continue on. There's rumblings that a ceasefire is very, very close, but then something like this morning's events might actually push that back another week or two. So we stay very close to it. We're looking at it every single day, probably 2 or 3 times a day in some cases, just to make sure that we've got the best information available at the time. So if we can move to the next slide. So what we've been doing, you can see this chart starts from the 16th of February. Whilst we're well aware that the actual conflict began in March, we were aware of the talks that were happening prior to that, the run up to the announcement or the first strikes that took place. It was something that we were already paying attention to. So you can see that we had a historic oil price of around about $70 a barrel. And alongside that, you had a market price that was sitting at around about 19 pence a unit. That had come down from some really high prices with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we had stability there for the best part of 6 to 8 months. As you got into sort of early March, you'll see that graph on the top, the orange one, starts to trend upwards. And that is really when the first strikes were announced. You've seen the prices go from $75 to nearly $100 within the space of a week. Interestingly, you can also see your energy price jumped from sort of 19 pence to about 21 pence. Now, if you look at that, that was round about 15% that it had jumped up by. Again, we've seen a similar trend when the energy prices started ramping up to about $115 a barrel. you can see that the unit price then shot up even higher to 23.5 pence a unit on average. So it had a similar jump. Now, interestingly, what we tend to find happens with the energy market is as those oil prices started to drop back down, the actual cost of energy continued to rise. And this is interesting for two reasons. Number one, it shows that the future infrastructure isn't where it needs to be. And as a result, the energy suppliers or the energy buyers won't actually remove that risk out. But the second part on that is also quite an interesting one. It's about where is our energy going to come from in the future. There is talk that there's some profit made here, as we also see with sort of other commodities. But it's an interesting question, and it's something that we would like to cover sort of in more detail as we go through this webinar with you as well. So if we move over to the next slide. So some of the areas that we're looking at, the longer that war drags on, we would expect to see the impact worsen. The real problem at the moment is currently you look at the temperatures outside, it's 30 degrees yesterday. People are really, if using any energy, it's probably only for aircon, and we're talking about sort of wider businesses there. But the storage ahead, so when winter 2026, no doubt winter is coming, and the real concerns there are when we get to the winter, do we have enough storage available? So even extremes of heat, they still have a impact on us later on in the year. If aircon is being used at the moment at a time where historically you wouldn't use it, it tends to hit our energy storage levels. As of last week, they were around about 20% full. They do need to be at 90% by the 1st of November. So if we had a continued heat wave, you would expect to draw on storage more. Refilling that storage ahead of winter is where the real risk is going to be. There are some questions. Is the US LNG or liquefied natural gas, is that going to fill the gap? There's some talk about a loosening of sanctions over in Russia. Regime change in Iran might contribute towards that and get things moving a little bit quicker. We've also been used to a lot of support from Norway as well. So for those that don't know, Norway is massive on hydropower. They export that energy as LNG, and that provides a second sort of network into the UK. Generally speaking, in August of every year, they shut down for essential maintenance. There has already been a request put in and accepted that they don't have to do as much maintenance this summer, which actually takes a little bit of the risk away from us. So those are just some of the areas and some of the concerns that we have on the wider market. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Ed. Ed's going to cover over some of the concerns closer to home.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Josh. I was hoping to be able to sweep in here with some good cheery news after Josh talking about the challenges that we're seeing in the commodity price. But sadly, I'm covering the topic of tenuos, which is a challenge for businesses, big and small, and domestically as well. If you've not been keeping up with what's been going on with tenuos and what it is, essentially in 2023 we received a new charge on our bills, that the transmission network use of service charge, and this is to raise funds for essential maintenance and expansion for an aging transmission network. I was reading something the other week that there was some infrastructure they think is still in place and operating that was first put in the 1950s, for example. And I don't know if anyone listening is a Telegraph reader, but there was a report, an article that they put out following a report from Montel. The emissions went up last year because of wind curtailment, and that was frankly because they couldn't get the power from offshore onto shore. So there's quite a lot that's going on with NUOS. It's very much seen as a benefit for the long term in terms of being able to help balance generation and demand, to be able to reach net zero, increase green electricity availability. And periodically throughout each year, NESO, the National Electricity System Operator, will publish the forecasted rates for what is essentially needed that National Grid say they need for all the projects that they're going to do. And there has been quite a lot of pushback on this, I must say. It's quite interesting seeing letters that DNOs, suppliers, and of course customers, which NFU Energy have been a part of, are talking about how this is damaging businesses, this is damaging the economy, and there's a lot of cause for this to be reconsidered or approached in a different way. If we move on to the next slide, what is the damage? So April 2026 was the first in a big hike since 2023. Back in September, NESO's rates we anticipated were going to be a 95% increase on average per MPAN. So there was quite a lot of nervousness about that coming to fruition. Through subsequent reevaluations of budget and cost and what National Grid actually needed, the rates did decrease to 62% on average. But as I put there, high voltage 2, if you were in high voltage 2, it was about an 87% hike, and extra high voltage 1 was 102% increase on the TNUoS rate. One client of mine is now paying £650,000 a year more for their TNUoS standing charges as a result of what happened in April 2026. That's also largely because the bands are changing slightly. A little bit later on, there's a screenshot of how those bands have shifted, and although they might not materially have moved by much, there are a lot of customers, if you're on the cusp of bands that are being rebanded upwards, which has caught some people out that we've seen over the last few months. DNO appeals are on the rise about how the rebanding, which is called Rio 3, has been approached by DNOs. That, from our experience, is a little bit of an inconsistency. And NFU Energy have been involved in appeals and disputes regarding that. We have also, to keep the good news going, had our first forecast for April 2027, which is showing a 23% increase in the TNUoS rate from what we've just had landed in April 26. So it looks like it's only rising, which is providing a lot of challenges. So if we are able to move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the considerations and key concerns that are coming up in the market. That's great, cool. So in terms of Russia's an interesting one. Josh said earlier that there's been some loosening of the sanctions on Russia, which is very interesting in the time of the conflict in the Middle East. There's certainly been a move to tankered LNG, particularly from the United States, and the US have got quite a lot of projects coming, pardon the pun, down the pipeline in the next few years, including I think one new facility and a new train at Freeport that's been brought online in the last 12 months. But I think as Josh intimated as well, we've just come out of, or are coming out of, the first wave of Norwegian maintenance this summer. If there are any problems with maintenance, any large delays, that really can tip the balance in a negative regard for energy security in Europe, and subsequently increased prices. And there is going to be an increased reliance on US LNG. Donald Trump and the US government have really positioned themselves to fill the gap. If you look at the European roadmap, which was what the EU put out there to essentially come away from Russian gas in terms of a strategy, they pointed directly to LNG. And clearly, if the United States are able to fill that void, then that's going to have some impact for them. There are some potential new gas fields in Qatar that we hear have been damaged because of fighting, and we're hearing reports of facilities being essentially shut down because the Strait of Hormuz is essentially closed. And from what I can gather from talking to senior economists around energy and also within the NFU, the longer that the conflict goes on, the longer the damage and the longer it will take for these facilities to be restarted. And as the bottom bullet point says, although a little bit of extra US LNG has come online in the last 12 months, we're still a year, 2 years away from the likes of Golden Pass, for example, the extra train at Corpus Christi being brought online and actually being able to fundamentally affect the balance in day-to-day of gas and power. So moving on again to the next slide. So So I suppose it's not all doom and gloom. There is a lot of investment in LNG terminals, with plans for some more coming online in the United States. There's a lot of talk, and I don't know if anyone's listening to the radio, but BBC 5 Live, Radio 4, and other providers have had a lot of government officials on that are talking about pressure for what they're going to do domestically in terms of the North Sea. As I mentioned earlier, there is a lot of pressure on NESO to think a little bit more creatively about what they do with the hikes into NUOS, as well as some of the other standing charges. We talked a little bit about Norway. I think Josh mentioned earlier that they can be a little bit more relaxed on the extent of maintenance. However, you do feel that that's just sort of pushing the problem a little bit further down the line. We're going to talk a little bit later in the session about work that we're doing with key suppliers about time of use tariffs, and there certainly looks to be some flexibility there for customers who are typically on fixed rate tariffs that can't get access to the wholesale market. And there's been a lot in terms of the EU gas storage rules that used to need to be guaranteed by 90% by the 1st of November. And over the past kind of year and a half, more and more has been done to relax that. Whether that is a good thing, on the one hand, you could say, well, it stops these price hikes when there's a rush to fill storage facilities. However, you could also argue the case that, well, actually, if you get to winter and it's cold and you've not got 90% in storage, it's just shifting the problem a little bit further on down the road. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a brief one. This is available on NESO's website. This is just the new bans, and you can kind of see a little bit how they've shifted since April the 1st this year. I don't think we need to dwell on that too much. So in terms of what support is out there, there are some things that are defined and some things that are not. So in terms of on-site generation, I don't think I'm giving any secrets away to say that, if you have daytime usage, looking into things like solar PV, we understand there is a consultation on small scale wind that's going through government at the minute. Depending on what happens with that, it might be that small scale wind might be able to support your business as well. Certainly, government in their consultation think that a 50 kilowatt wind turbine at about 35-meter tip height will be sufficient for most small dairies, for example. Also, and this is something that I can't stress enough, as it's something that here at NFU Energy we do and see all day, every day, is looking at your energy contract and making sure that you are on the right contract for you, depending on your business appetite for risk and your size. There's the ability to be on a flexible tariff. I always say that you can in essence, turn a flexible contract into a fixed, but you can't turn a fixed into a flex. So making sure within that you're on the right contract for your business, and talking to your energy suppliers about licensed exempt supply. This is something that's become really popular in the last 12 months, and is essentially legislation that provides some discount on some of your non-commodity costs where your business is matched with a generator. And for every kilowatt hour that you're matched, you do get a certain degree of relief. The overall pot's quite large. It's about £66 a megawatt hour, but that will be divvied up between the importer, the generator, and also your energy supplier. In terms of banding, as I say, the bands have shifted slightly. There are a lot of businesses out there that are holding on to capacity for projects that might be coming 10 years down the pipeline, for example. But I would really urge anyone that's sitting on capacity that they're not using and won't be using for the foreseeable future to actually assess whether they need that or not, whether the extra cost on the bills that they're paying every month is worth hanging on to that for future purposes. There was the opportunity to reband ahead of April the 1st, 2026. Now, it's a little bit up in the air at the moment whether there'll be future windows for rebanding. I think the official line is that it's going to be 2031, which is what they call the next price control period. However, there's a lot going on in terms of the bans and, as I say, the pressure on NESO to do something about the increase in costs for TNUoS. So that might change. NFU Energy have also got a Tenuos calculator that's available on our website, where we keep up to date the rates. So that if you put in some simple details, your MPAN and your capacity, it does demonstrate over a 5-year forecast what the potential impact to your business will be. So if we can skip on to one more, thank you. So I would also urge businesses to look into the network charging compensation scheme. I fully appreciate that this is probably only going to affect a narrow window of our audience base for this, but this is a government scheme that is looking to provide relief for energy intensive industries defined by their SIT codes and also by their energy costs being 20% of their GVA, the gross value add. Now, as I say, this is a bit of a stretch for most. There are really a small number of businesses that I anticipate in our community that will apply, be able to apply successfully for this. But it's well worth just spending 10 minutes to check your SIT code against the list, because it's worth 90% relief off your Tenuos, your Duos, and your Basuos, so your distribution use and your balancing system. It's relief that the government has put in place because it recognises that energy costs are effective British competitiveness on an international market, not just in Europe. And again, I've kind of put it as a footnote because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. But if you have diversified your business into generation and storage, such as batteries and anaerobic digestion, it's really worth looking into if you can qualify for non-final demand. Every business that uses electricity comes under final demand. However, the only exception is businesses where you're only importing to directly support generation storage. So, for example, if you've got an AD plant, you have an electricity income essentially as a backup, so that if your engines go down, that you run the plant off, that you can keep the digesters and whatnot going. That's again worth looking into, as it's 100% relief from your Tenuos and some of the other standing charge costs, which is frankly vital, I think, to the economics of running businesses within our community. If I skip on another slide, this talks about what is essentially the Network Charging Compensation Scheme Light, which is the BIC scheme, the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme. Now, this isn't unlike the NCC that we talked about in the last slide. This isn't yet live, but this is going to come live in April 2027. And there is some work that's still ongoing about this. It's designed to target frontier industries, and I've put a brief description of some of the industries that relates to in the bullet point. But essentially, BICS is designed to be relieving some of the non-commodity costs that aren't to do with transmission. These are things like your renewable obligation, your feed-in tariff charge, your capacity market charge, and a few others. I would say that clearly it's 11 months away from coming into live. However, it is discounting the same standing charge elements that the licensed exempt supply would be. So if your contract's up for renewal within the next 12 months, I would say really talk to your energy supplier or talk to NFU Energy about how you can take advantage of the licensed exempt supply, because quite frankly, at the minute, I'm not aware that any of our in the farming and growing community sectors going to be able to qualify for BICS. However, as I said earlier, it's still a fluid scheme, and there are still some changes that are afoot. So it might be that we're able to get some relief somewhere down the line. However, as it stands, I must say that we're not currently eligible. So if we move on one further, this is a couple of working groups that the NFU Energy have been sitting on, which are really quite key to getting some mitigation in place and some parity in place for some of the challenges, particularly around standing charges. So DCP 412 is essentially, it addresses high capacity sites that have low utilization. So what I mean by that in terms of examples, like grain dryers, for example, which may be in use August, September at their full capacity. but through the rest of the year really aren't anywhere near their top capacity. But they will be paying for all 12 months for the top or the entirety of their KVA, which there are calls to smooth that out, and whether that is by working on an average over the course of the 12 months, or you're just paying for the full whack essentially in the months that you utilize your entire capacity, remains to be seen. But that one's been kicking around since 2022. So we're hopeful, with our fingers crossed, that we do get some movement out of that soon. The other is DCP 466, which is an interesting one. It's a little bit newer, and this was only raised in October last year. But this addresses what's known as the 50% rule. So if you are sitting on capacity that, as I mentioned earlier, that you might want to look to jettison or surrender back to the grid, to be able to take advantage of being rebanded, i.e., dropping bands, and getting the maximum amount of relief from TNUoS that you can, you currently have to drop 50% by 50%. So if you're 1,000 kVA, you'd have to go to 500 or lower, for example. Now, this is very restrictive, and there are a lot of businesses that frankly just can't meet that. They can't entertain that. However, there are a lot out there that could maybe get rid of 10%, 15%, 20%. That's capacity that goes back to the grid that they can reutilize. However, the code frankly forbids it at the moment. So this has been raised by a friend of mine, Peter Waymont at UKPN, which is really interesting. Is this is a DNO that have raised this, and would benefit quite a lot of businesses out there. There are the arguments about how that affects their revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But clearly, if you've got a lot of constrained areas where you're waiting for over a decade to get capacity, every little helps for the DNOs to be able to reallocate it. There are other things that we're doing that help. There was a consultation on changing the inflation mechanism for the feed-in tariff and the renewal obligation certificate scheme. Between NFU Energy and the NFU, we put together quite a conclusive response to that, which was in line with what a lot of the industry was saying. However, that inflation mechanism was changed from RPI to CPI mid-scheme. We've been lobbying for horticulture in particular to be included in the energy intensive industry scheme. The energy intensive industries list, I should say, sorry, so that they can take advantage of the network charging compensation scheme. There's been a lot going on with that, but controlled environment horticulture, by definition of having its own climate change agreement, for example, is energy intensive, and we're trying really hard to get that formally recognised. I think I've talked a little bit about licensed exempt supply in terms of working with suppliers to grow that community, pardon the pun, within farming and growing, looking at capacity reductions, trying to perform feasibility studies and strategize with business to how they can mitigate, particularly in terms of TNUoS charges that are coming. And contracts are an interesting one, because back in the wake of the Ukraine war, back 4 years ago now, most energy suppliers slipped a clause into their contracts which talked about being able to open the T's and C's to pass on other charges, which means that some contracts are more fixed than others, if you like, talking about fixed price contracts. And NFU Energy, we've been trying to do this the right way. We've been talking about how some contracts, they might have a better unit rate, for example, but their T's and C's are a little bit looser in terms of the standing charge elements being reforecast, and vice versa, where you might be paying a little bit more on the commodity rate. However, the T's and C's are ironclad, and we get involved in a lot of things to try and make sure that there is parity and fairness within the industry in terms of those contracts, and certainly for the customers that we deal with every day. I think Josh is going to talk a little bit now briefly about some of the things that are potentially coming down the pipeline that you may have heard of in terms of a time of use tariff in particular. So Josh, I will hand back over to you if you don't mind.
Thanks again, Ed. So yeah, so we just wanted to have a look at some of the things that, as Ed said, were in the pipeline. So what we're currently doing here at NFU Energy is we're also sort of on the ground looking out and saying how can we make things better? How can we help out? How can we especially ensure that people are looking at us and saying you're really doing something for me here? I think there's some really exciting things that we're looking at the moment. The first of those is Smart Save. So we are working with two of the biggest suppliers in the UK on these. Smart Save is basically giving people energy free of charge. It's currently on a trial basis and it's currently being done Wednesday in 6-week chunks. Now, Smart Save in the very name of the word, the smart being there, the key thing of that is you need to have a smart meter and it needs to be a smart meter that's actively sending data back to the grid. We'll talk on smart meters a little bit more, but it's really going to be important going forward that you do have a smart meter in the premises that is sending data back to the grid if you want to benefit from any of the new niches that are coming down the line further. But yeah, smart saving, its very nature is basically effectively giving away energy free of charge from the supplier to the end user. If we went into it from a more real point of view, it would be a case that there are certain times of day that there is a lot of energy on the grid, maybe too much energy, and it makes much more sense to give it away to end users free of charge than it does to actually sell a generator and not to give it to the grid and pay them twice the amount. So we tend to find Smart Save. It is really, really good. It benefits people. There's a reason why they're doing it. This also comes on to the second of those bits, Peak Save. So we are working again with another large supplier at the moment. Peak Save will be something that you hear a lot more about maybe in 2028, 2029. But again, we want to sort of be on the front foot. We want to be agile and we want to be looking at these things for members really, really early. So Peak Save will be a way that we will look at the makeup of your energy usage and we will track the data that is going back to the grid every 30 minutes and then we will build a custom tariff for a sector. So if we use dairy as an example, generally you would argue between probably 3 and 4:30 in the morning, the dairy farm is already using energy, whether that's for the chillers, whether it's for the ice banks, whether it's to heat up the water, there is energy being used. Now, arguably, you would say that probably 80%, 85% of the UK is still asleep at this time, and anybody that's using energy at that time when it's readily available, and there's a lot of it on the grid, should surely be getting a cheaper price for energy at that time of day. Now, that obviously has a countermeasure. If you look at 7 a.m. when most of the UK start to get up, kids are getting ready for school, you would normally see within that half an hour interval, the energy price will peak. This is where sort of the future of energy is really coming in. If you have batteries alongside solar, for example, you would use the battery power or the energy that's being stored in the battery at 7 a.m. rather than paying the extortionate grid prices that you see at that time of day. It will be the same sort of as you run through the day. If you look sort of 12 till 4, solar in the UK is at its absolute peak. It's generating a lot of energy. You would argue that you should be paying a cheaper unit price at that time of day. Again, when the kids get home from school or parents get home from work, they're putting the dinner on for people. You normally almost certainly see a spike in energy. You get the baths on, you get the TV on for the evening. That's where you're going to want to try and avoid using energy. So this is where sort of the whole idea around using batteries and using batteries at a time that it benefits you will become really important. We're looking at having the first trial of that launched by the end of this year. But we are going to be sort of primarily aiming it at two main sectors. I think our key ones that we focused on to begin with are dairy and poultry. That said, if those trials go really, really well, there's already talks about looking at each sector and literally having a tariff name for your basically type of business, whether that's a horty tariff, whether it's a dairy tariff, whether it's a pig tariff. This is where the future of energy is coming in, and it's really, really exciting to be sort of at the forefront of that, giving data back to energy suppliers and making things work. So those are some of the areas that we're sort of working on. If we want to move on to the next slide. So yeah, so Ed's touched on Chinoas in a lot more detail. We will see sort of towards the end of this year, we'll see forecasts and projections for future years. So as we touched on, sort of the pricing period at the moment goes out up until 2031, but this is constantly reviewed. By 30th of November 2026, we will start to have prices or more certain prices for 27, 28. And then similar to this year, by the 31st of January next year, we will have the final forecast for 2027, 2028. That will be a cycle that sort of follows through every single year. But I would say don't be surprised if you see that happening with some of the other non-commodity charges that we spoke about at the very beginning, because this is something that's constantly reviewed. Some of them will go up, and you might be surprised to know that some of them will also come down as well. So it's not always negative news. Current projections on the whole, however, do show increases of about 5 to 10% over the next 5 years. And that's why we said earlier it's worth looking at all of the non-commodity charges, seeing if you can get relief on some areas that you might not necessarily get on other ones. So if we do want to move to the next slide for me. Okay, so some of the other steps that we would say definitely follow through on, really understand what's actually fixed in your energy contract. This is becoming a really big subject at the moment. There are a lot of sort of third parties, a lot of times you get calls out of the blue. It's really, really important that if you're not using NFU Energy, and we would say definitely do give us a call, even if it's to do the comparison. But if you're not using us, you really need to know what's actually going into your bills. There are far too many times that we get calls after somebody's taken out a contract and it turns out it wasn't fully fixed, or there were pass-throughs that were included, and all of a sudden the customer's got a much higher bill than they ever expected. It's so much easier to fix that at source, making sure that you really understand what's in your contract. Reviewing those bills, I think it's another one to be aware of. Increasingly know what your energy patterns look like. It will help you sort of for the future of energy. Some of these exciting tariff options that we're looking at the moment, it's going to be dependent on customers having some data as well. Look at renewable options. So we are starting to see it now with some of the buyers. There are extra added benefits to having green energy supplies. We're working again with a lot of the suppliers. Some of our tariffs do come green as standard. You'll get your energy certificate that can be displayed. It will also help you with scope 3 and further down the line scope 4 emissions for the future as well. And I think it's always good to be aware of your own key dates. And by that, when does your contract come up for renewal? One thing that not many people are aware of is you can actually renew your contract up to 18 months before it ends, before the current one ends. Now, at times like now, if you think about what I said earlier, if you're looking at where the market price is currently, you might have seen a bit of an increase, but it will probably be a very small increase in comparison to if we did have a sustained heat wave and the energy prices were much higher at the end of summer. And what we've historically seen, people tend to believe that the energy price drops in the summer months. Since Russia invasion of Ukraine, we've tend to see that's gone the other way around. Prices tend to be good in the spring months, and in the summer they tend to start having the panic about what's going to happen in the winter. So just have a look at your own contracts, have a look at your own bills, and just make sure you're aware of those key dates. If you're within anywhere from 6 to 18 months, or I'd say from 1 month to 18 months, give us a call and at least we can give you some options as well. And I think that's my last point there as well, just making sure that you're actually contacting us for expert advice. We've been shortlisted for Industry Expert of the Year last year. Year prior to that, we won Best Customer Service in the UK. You are really going to be dealing with people that are going to give you that best advice, best in class, and just making sure you're actually getting the answers that you really need. So if we can head on to the next slide for me. And yeah, we just want to sort of put this into practice. These are some of the things that we've done by reviewing your contracts, by having your end dates. We can actually put those into our buying groups. In terms of buying groups, what we're doing, I know we touched on it at the very start of this webinar. We have about 22,000 members on our books at the moment. We combine the buying power of members with renewals anywhere from tomorrow up to 18 months away, and we would actually then say to a supplier, these are our customer numbers. What is the absolute best you can do as a group buying power? So what you tend to find is, you can see from the images there, we've done sponsorship of the air ambulance, we've gone out to events, we've given out toolkits to people, and these all come about from working with suppliers using that collective buying power of NFU members, and also some non-members in there, but we use the collective buying power we have to get you the absolute best that we can. We also say look at your energy audits, feasibility studies as well. So I think before you start spending money on your energy bills, start looking at the makeup of your own units, start making sure that are we actually keeping our costs as low as we can? Is the equipment as efficient as it needs to be? We all have to do MOTs on our cars, on our tractors, on our trucks. It's no different doing it on the business as well. Same with feasibility studies. If you're thinking about renewables, if you're thinking about, okay, now get off grid here, it's worth having the feasibility study first. And these are things that we can definitely help with. It's always better to sort of make sure you make the right decision up front and have the ability to change that later than make the wrong decision and try and change it, especially when it involves people like the grid as well. So I'd say for all of those reasons, definitely speak to us on every occasion. And then I think there's few more slides. So yeah, so what we wanted to end just before sort of a Q&A, we wanted to sort of look at some of the takeaways there. So I think, yeah, key takeaway really, the unit rate or the cost of energy has experienced extreme volatility. It's around about 25% higher than it was before the Iran war. And remember, this is just your commodity prices sort of driving increases there. Alongside that, we've seen increases on your non-commodity charges. So basically, Chinuas charges, they change on the 1st of April every year, and those have also gone up as well. On a positive, better than forecast weather conditions have helped us sort of prevent bigger rises. So if you can see that as a positive, if we had had really bad weather at the same time that these other things had happened, you would be looking at a much bigger price increase on your bills as well. One of the other areas that we look at, what has this whole Iran situation done closer to home for us? I think it's allowed the government to have a little bit more of a backbone really and say, okay, this is more of a balanced argument now. There is really a reason why we need to be sort of self-reliant. There is a reason why we need to be making our own energy at home rather than relying on the likes of the US or relying on Qatar for imports. So it has created more of a balanced argument. You will probably see it's given a little bit more power to say, yes, some of these charges we will have to continue levying them, albeit we will continue sort of fight for them where they are wrong. As I said sort of a few slides ago, definitely consider a smart meter. We can't stress enough how important that is, not just for now, but definitely for the future. And yeah, contact the team to just carry out checks on your consumption and your capacity. That one is quite an important one because your consumption, the difference of 200 units could put you in a different band altogether, which can totally impact the prices that you get from a supplier when you request a quote. Same with your capacity as well. If you've got the wrong capacity on your meter, you could be in the wrong band. And when you consider some of those bands could have differences of £7 or £8 a day, you could be looking at thousands of pounds by the end of the year just by not having it in the right capacity band at the beginning. So yeah, we'll definitely say so. Those are some of the key takeaways that I would be saying leaving this webinar. Definitely ones to think about. And if you're uncertain, give us a call regarding those as well. So I think at this point, we will be more than happy to have any questions.
Excellent. Josh and Ed, thank you so much for your time today. A lot to take on board, a lot of information. As said at the beginning, we are recording this session and we will send out copies so that you can go through the webinar in your own time if you choose to. So we're going to open up to questions now. So 2 seconds while I just bring up the questions. Fabulous. Right. Okay. So first of all, just going through some of the questions there is, and both Josh, Ed, I'll open it up to both of you, is do you think that the energy costs at the fundamental and policy level will be decoupled from gas prices in the near future? Or are those supplements on renewables factored into the energy costs and the infrastructure renewal costs? Who wants to pick that? This is a question that we get asked on a sort of regular basis. So who would like to pick that one up?
I'll do it. Thanks, thanks, Lisa, and thanks for whoever asked this question. Certainly, if you listen to the noises that government are making, particularly recently, I think Josh alluded to this as well. The situation in the Middle East has certainly, I think, prompted governments to look at this again. However, I do question fundamentally how likely it is. We are for the foreseeable future still going to be relying on gas for electricity production. We're certainly going to rely on it for heating. Therefore, I wouldn't be in this position if I could give you a timeline for when that'll going to happen, but it's certainly very, very challenging. I would also say that in the same circles of people that are talking about decoupling the two, they're also talking for more exploration or utilizing existing wells differently in the North Sea. Fundamentally, we're a society that is still based around fossil fuels. I know that's controversial to say, but we are. So it's not just as easy as snapping the fingers. In terms of how it affects, I think there was something in terms of infrastructure renewal costs. So to NUOS, for example, it's really interesting that actually, if you look at the updates, I think it was at the back of the King's speech, the Energy Independence Bill somewhat looks at putting new, I can't remember whether it was in the form of tax or in terms of a levy or a standing charge levy on large scale renewable generators, which from my interpretation of it anyway is a little bit like what happened with electric vehicles and road tax. They were exempt for so long, and then it got so popular that essentially the DVLA decided they wanted a piece of it, so they started taxing electric vehicles. So I kind of feel like that's a little bit like that as well. So I don't feel like I've necessarily answered your question because it's a hard one to answer. My personal opinion is that clearly the government have said they want to do it, but how easy it is in the next 20 years or so to actually do, I'm not really all that sure. It seems not insurmountable, but certainly very difficult.
Thanks, Ed. We've got another question, which is, can you explain if P442 is of any use to us?
Okay, so so P442, it tends to sort of mirror my understanding, and I might need to double check this myself if I'm honest with you, because there are so many different ones out there now. But P442 tends to work hand in hand with what we know as peer-to-peer trading or sleeving agreements. Okay, so P442, it could be of use to you. What we would have to really understand is what exemptions are you going to get. So we would normally see that as your NUOS costs, your DUOS charges, and one of the other non-commodities. Slips my mind at the moment, but I could definitely check it for you. What we would then have to do is we would have to assess that against the capacity of your meter at the moment and what the capacity of the meter is going to increase by. So what you can find is if you're going to, say, for example, generate £20 a day, but the standing charge by going up a band is going to be £25, you would argue that it doesn't make sense to do that because the long-term aim is it's actually going to cost you more than you make from it. If it was the other way around and it was going to bring you in £20 and it was only going to add £5 to your standing charge, or it wasn't really going to change it, then yes, you would argue all day that that's an option to explore in more detail. So yeah, short of, again, probably similar to Ed, really, I can't give you a direct answer, but if we did have your meter number, if we could check the consumption and half-hourly data history, we can definitely start to say how close you are to the next band and whether there's scope to actually fit that within the current banding agreement or not.
I think just to add on top of what Josh said, I got a little bit thrown off because I thought we were talking about 466, and then with the World Cup coming up, I thought we were talking about football, with 442. But I think the wider implications we sort of talked a little bit about earlier, because it opened the door for licensed exempt supply. That's the big takeaway that we've talked about quite a lot from that. And as Josh says, there's other stuff that's coming out of that modification that we need to understand. But certainly, if you are coming up for renewal both as an exporter or an importer or a bit of both, talk to NFU Energy, because the suppliers, quite frankly, that have not looked into licensed exempt supply or put together an offering, in certainly my view, are losing market share. And there's a bit of a mad scramble to snap up generators because there are clearly more importers than there are generators out there. So there are some really good deals to be had on licensed exempt supply, and certainly as a mitigation strategy for standing charge increases on the whole, it's something that really do recommend and urge that you talk to us about.
Excellent. Ed, Josh, thank you. There is time, a couple of seconds left if anybody has any more questions to ask. But just to close off the today's webinar, keen for a question, Ed and Josh, to yourselves. So obviously, as an organisation, we can help and support anybody with advice on their energy contracts, their energy bills, their energy usage, but not everybody on this call will be using NFU Energy. So if they're using another broker, what's the key thing they should be challenging their broker with in the times of uncertainty that we're facing right now?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, definitely. I'd say definitely for everybody, I think if you are using a broker, I say it's always best that they're trusted. If you've used them before and they've given you a good service, that doesn't mean that they're fully aware of all the changes that are coming in on the grid going forward. And I say to every single person out there, really, you should always be getting a comparative quote. There's no harm in asking us to give you a price or to actually check the prices you've got. And if they're absolutely amazing, we're going to tell you they're absolutely amazing and we think you should go with them. But likewise, it takes a keen eye to spot all the changes. You can probably see just some of the charges we've spoken about today. We've not even touched upon some of the other charges and some of the things that we see on a daily basis from brokers. So I can't encourage people enough to actually at least just give us a call and let us have a look at it for you. I would say again, if you are using another broker though, make sure they have actually come in from somebody that's actually used them already and they've had a good experience, or someone that you've used yourself. We have to stress all the time, we can't pick out any individual, but there are probably best part of 2,000 different third-party consultants out there. And there are regulations in place. I think one of the things you can ask is if they are registered under the ADR scheme. So that's Alternative Dispute Resolution Scheme. They should then give you a code reference or a reference number that you can actually type in online and check for them. If they're not regulated, I would say please don't touch them with a barge pole. Sounds harsh to say, but if they haven't gone through the basics of getting regulated, it's a bit scary to wonder what you would get into and how they will actually be looked at if you had to raise a complaint. So I'd definitely say ADR scheme is probably a key one to focus on, and then give us a call and we can compare it for you.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. And we've just had a quick question come in from Julie. So I reduced my KVA on a half-hourly meter some time ago, thinking it would allow me to drop down the standing charge banding. It didn't. And when I contacted my supplier, they said that I had to stay where I was, as this is where I'd signed the contract at. I've since further reduced my KVA, not within the year. I should now be in a lower banding, and I believe that my supplier seems very reluctant to drop the banding down. Josh, again, probably over to yourself on that one, but what advice would you give in a situation for that Julie's facing right now?
Sorry, I'm just catching up. I'm just reading it back again, just so it's making sense to me. Okay. Sorry, just give me literally 10 seconds. I'm conscious of time. Okay, so this is one where, again, we might have to sort of look at this with you, but we have seen that there is actually an appeal process to when the district network operator or the DNO says no. We do actually have a couple of cases going through that at the moment, whereby some of these rules, they're best part of 15 different DNOs in the UK. It's a bit of a lottery sometimes. It comes down to where you live and where your DNO provider was. National Grid might say yes to it. Electricity Northwest may say no. However, they all follow the same disputes process. And that's something that we would probably say we would have to take this one there for you. The 50% or the removal of the 50% rule should change that for you. There is also a biannual review on non-commodity charges and what bands you fall within as well. So we do have a sort of a 5-year window where prices are projected for, but every 2 years you should also be able to look at what banding you sit in and apply for a change into another band as well. So as an absolute sort of key part on that, we would say we would appeal it for you. In the second instance, it might be where it needs to be for the best part of 18 to 24 months before we could actually then apply to move it into another band. I know it's not great news, but that is the process, and what we would follow from a process point of view for you.
Excellent. Thank you. I think the key message is if there's any doubt, then please ring into the office, speak to a member of either Josh's team or Ed's team, and they will be able to look into that for you. One very quick final question before we close off today, and I'll open this, Ed, to yourself and to Josh. So solar on roofs can provide cost of 5 pence, not 25 pence per unit. Customers are seeing between 30% and 50% of their energy costs being reduced by this level. Would you recommend this be the first step to promote to customers?
Yeah, I think from the get-go, thanks for the question. I think from the get-go, we kind of said that you can control very little in your energy bill realistically, but the one thing that you actually can do is the amount of electricity that you import from the grid. If you're and I'd say certainly get a feasibility study done to see if something like, I mean, we talk about solar specifically here, how it can affect your business, whether it's in a positive way if you're consuming electricity during the day. Absolutely do it, because it is, or look into it, because it is taking control of that one of the three elements that you can control. I would say between the comment about 5p to 25p, I suppose that sort of depends on what you're using to calculate your ROI. 25p on an import contract, I can certainly see you'd be saving, and if you can import electricity for 5p on the wholesale rate, then I would say get some trading done if you can, because that's such a wide delta there. But yeah, within the feasibility, you are taking what is I suppose a realistic view of what the cost of electricity saving would be over a longer period. But that's such a wide delta. You're probably dropping somewhere in the middle, and it depends on whether you're only able to access the fixed rate market because of volume thresholds, or whether you're on a flex or able to access a flex tariff. But I would say just speak to us at NFU Energy, because that's the kind of thing we can help you navigate.
Great stuff. Thanks, Ed. That's all we've got time for today. However, if we have any questions that have gone unanswered, we will reach out to those that have joined and make sure that we provide answers to your questions. But again, if you have anything more that you'd like to raise with us, please call into the office directly, speak to Ed's team, speak to Josh's team. Anybody within the business is more than happy to provide support. So it just leaves me to say thank you to both Josh and to Ed for great presentations today, really informative. Hope it's provided you with a good insight as to what's happening at the moment. We will continue these chain of webinars to ensure that we're constantly providing regular updates to you. But for now, thank you very much, and take care.